All right, with a very good friend who was born in Central New York, spent a lot of time in Western New York and up and down the East Coast doing some baseball and working for a particular armed forces community, as well as being the play-by-play voice of the New England Patriots. Bob, great to see you again.
See you, Rich. Good to be with you. It was great to be up in the Buffalo area a couple of weeks ago, and we're expecting an Arctic wave by this weekend, so we should have similarly frigid conditions.
Should be interesting. It was so cold a couple weeks ago, and then this past weekend it was almost 60 in Buffalo, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, that's how it rolls in wintertime here in Western New York. You just never know what you're going to get, especially in certain parts. I think Jim Nantz put it perfectly. I think it was during the Kansas City game when he said something to the effect of, you can be in Orchard Park and literally 10 minutes away, the weather is completely different. And off of Lake Erie, that's kind of how it works here, as everybody watching knows, and you certainly know, having lived here in Western New York for a time. Before we get to the Patriots,
Mhm.
I got to ask you about your time at Navy, because what a year they had this year.
Yeah, I had the pleasure and the privilege of working for the Naval Academy, calling 16 seasons of football play-by-play. And really my entree at Navy, while traveling a minor league baseball path, trying to climb the broadcasting ladder and the baseball ladder at the same time, was Western New York native and Josh Lewin. Josh was working in Baltimore at WBAL doing sports talk radio, and he was also the Navy basketball broadcaster. So in 1996-97, Navy needed someone to fill in for Josh because he took a job at the time, I believe, with the Chicago Cubs in WGN. And luckily, I had a good referral from a very talented young Western New York native. And Navy bought in on me, and the rest is history, as they say. But I had really 16 amazing years of calling Navy football. My first broadcast was a game that came down literally to the final play, a Hail Mary at Notre Dame Stadium. The Navy receiver caught the ball in a deflection, but was shoved out of bounds at the 1 yard line. And then went through some very lean times, a 3-30 stretch, but eventually saw Paul Johnson and then Kenny Niumatalolo build the program to what it became, and finished my tenure at Navy in 2012. And then the following year was hired by the Patriots flagship station, 98.5 The Sports Hub, a CBS radio station at the time, to do the play-by-play for the Pats.
And you have some hardware to prove it, that we're aware of as well. And I'm sure you have them in very safe keeping and in a good place for sure. So congratulations on that. But it is interesting how, and we don't, it is the elephant in the room, but obviously the Patriots dominated the Bills for 20 years. And now the tables have turned. Right now it is kind of flipped with Josh Allen and the Bills and their recent history, 5 consecutive division titles. And now, it's, I'm assuming, feeling for New Englanders like it felt for us for a long time.
Well, it's funny, Rich, the line of demarcation with the Bills and Patriots, like it is with so many teams, seems to be 2019, Tom Brady's final year. I think 32-3, Brady's record against the Bills. But it was about that time, too, when we began to see Josh Allen take some significant steps forward. And I think about where the Patriots are today and where the Bills were when Josh Allen took over as the quarterback. I mean, the Bills at that time were frankly in a better situation because they'd been a playoff team, as you know, with Tyrod Taylor. Sean McDermott had his program in place. They had drafted on the defensive side, I think Edmonds was a guy that was in place there as kind of a young leader of that defense. And really where the Patriots are right now is they have Drake May, but they have to surround him with the other pieces. And they have a first-year head coach in Gerard Mayo, who's gone through a lot of growing pains and certainly a big learning curve for him this year and his staff. And there's been a lot of inconsistency that really has marked this season. They got hit hard by some injuries on defense early. They've had problems on the offensive line all season long. And frankly, the game against the Bills, the first half against the Bills, was probably the best 30 minutes of football they played. Unfortunately, they played 60 minutes that didn't even come close against the Chargers last week. So it'll be interesting to see what they go out this season on, kind of a note they go out this season on this weekend against the Bills, who presumably will be resting some of their top shelf guys like Josh Allen as that game progresses.
Yeah, let's talk about Jared Mayo, because obviously, you read, you hear, you see. I mean, there's rumors all over the place that he's sort of a lame duck, that it's kind of a one and done. What do you make of his body of work to this point? Obviously, he was a beloved player in New England, and that's a big reason why he's there. But the rumors of Vrabel coming back are out there and have been sort of swirling. So what do you make of Jerod Mayo's, albeit short body of work, and what do you make of what future, if any, there is for him as the head coach of this club?
I think the thing with Gerard when he was hired is that, he was really hired with a vision for the future and the potential as a coach. He'd only been coaching in the NFL for 5 years, heretofore, as an assistant on Bill Belichick's staff. As you mentioned, he was a very well liked and certainly well respected Patriots player, a first round draft pick, a captain by his second season, someone that his teammates referred to at a very young age as Gerard Belichick because as a player, he reflected his head coach in so many striking ways. But as he took over this program, I noted, the roster was very thin. The coaching situation around him really featured a lot of inexperience. He's not a guy that has worked outside of New England, whether as a player or in the business world, because he did spend some time as an executive in the business community with a healthcare company before going back into football and getting into coaching. That was local. And as a football assistant, it's all been with the Patriots. So there really wasn't this broad network of contacts around the league and really not a lot of experience in contact with college coaches, let alone NFL coaches. And so you have kind of I don't want to say a mishmash, but it's really not a staff that was formed with a lot of cohesiveness to begin with. Some of the guys that are on this staff, like Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, came from Cleveland. Others came from elsewhere. Some stayed in-house. Primarily, the defensive staff is a group of carryover coaches who've been here in New England. So I think it's really been a process for all of them this year to try to learn as a staff, manage games, for Gerard to find his coaching voice. And, they really, from the start, I think offensively especially, have been hamstrung by just poor personnel on the offensive line. And, the problems there have never allowed, I think, Alex Van Pelt to have a full playbook, although he's done a very good job, in my opinion, of developing Drake May as this year has gone along. The biggest disappointment was the defense, and that was Gerard's specialty as a coach and as a player, of course. And the defense has really failed to live up to expectations. There are other factors involved in that, like injuries and whatnot, but it still has been a failure when it comes to the performance of that group. There have been a number of reports by the proverbial NFL insiders in the last couple of weeks that he's likely to be back, barring a calamity. As I mentioned, I think Robert Kraft has a strong feeling about Gerard Mayo and his potential as a head coach. I think he has the potential to be a successful coach in this league, given a lot of the qualities that I know that he possesses. However, as this team has gone up and down, there are going to be questions asked as soon as the season ends about what the path forward is and whether or not there's been enough experienced and witnessed when it comes to starting to approach that potential. And it really does, as you mentioned, complicate things that Mike Vrabel is still available as himself, a very popular former Patriots player, Patriots Hall of Famer, in fact, and a multiple Super Bowl champion.
So is the NFL, Bob, because you see so many guys, take those first head coaching jobs and they inherit bad teams typically, whether it's by virtue of just poor roster building, injury, bad drafts, whatever the case may be. I guess the good thing for Jerod Mayo going forward, though, is that it looks like he's got the quarterback in place, which, let's face it, in the NFL is the number one thing you have to have if you're going to be successful in this league. So let's talk about Drake May. What have been, obviously, our first impressions of him as Bills fans and being in the division, at least in front of our faces in person, was a couple weeks ago. And gosh, I got to tell you, man, there were some plays not only that he made with throws. The booty touchdown at the front corner of the end zone was remarkable. That was about as good a pass as you're ever going to throw or see a quarterback throw in this league. He showed a lot of excellent pocket presence, a way to spin out of pressure and make some plays with his legs and his feet. A lot of composure. Yes, he comes from an athletic family, of course, but he looks like he is potentially the real deal now. To your point, they need to build around him.
Yeah, no question, Rich. I think he's been a player who's even exceeded expectations, high as they were, coming out of North Carolina as the third overall pick. Out of the draft, among the first round quarterbacks, I think it was widely reported and speculated that Drake May was maybe the furthest away from being NFL ready among those first round quarterbacks. There was a lot of dissection on ESPN and other outlets with the video about his footwork and his mechanics, his delivery. He had played in a North Carolina offense that didn't require play calls to command a huddle, didn't take snaps under center, with few exceptions in the red zone. And so he really had a huge learning curve to overcome while getting into the NFL, just from that standpoint, from a procedural standpoint. I think the Patriots were really concerned initially. They're very conservative in their development of him. Going back to preseason, he played very seldomly. In fact, only one series in the first game. And I think a lot of that was traced to the concerns about the offensive line. And then the first part of the season, they wanted to go with Jacoby Brissett and give Drake May an opportunity to apprentice with him. But then by week 6, they were in a situation where they were just stuck in quicksand, and the offense couldn't get moving. There wasn't much excitement when it came to the team. I think, at that point in time, they're going to get ready to play the Houston Texans. Some were a bit surprised that Drake May was going to start then, and maybe not the following week. Some lamented that he didn't start the previous week in a winnable game against Miami. But whatever, you want to say hypothetically or theoretically, the fact is that since he started in week 6, he has brought fun to football that wasn't there, frankly, offensively for this team the last couple of years, because, as you mentioned, those kind of wild plays. And I think, in a very similar way as a guy like Josh Allen, he can do things with his legs and his arm. And I'm not going to compare him to Josh. Maybe Justin Herbert is the better comparison in terms of their body types and the way they play the game. But we saw him in the last game, for example, and he struggled a bit, but he knew he had a free play. He's going backwards, and he's about to take a hit, and off the back foot, he lobs a throw to give his receiver an opportunity to run under it and make the catch for a touchdown. The only real significant offensive highlight of that game against the Chargers. So even in the most dismal performances for the Patriots, we've seen May emerge as a bright light for them.
For sure. So let's move forward to this game this weekend. As you mentioned, the Bills will not play a lot of players. Obviously, they're going to try and use this week as a chance to get good, get healthy. They have had multiple injuries throughout the year to a lot of their starters, mostly on the defensive side of the football. So you're going to see that happen. And then, of course, on your side, there is all that talk, because it was all talked about with the Giants last week. And what are you doing, Giants? You had that first pick, and there's a faction of Patriot fans that are saying, figure out a way to lose this game so we can get that number 1 and maybe go out and get that Travis Hunter so we can have that breakout wide out for Drake May, or that lockdown corner, or if he plays both, right? But you have been in and around NFL locker rooms a long time. You know that these guys, regardless of what they're going to be told, are going to play hard, right?
Well, that's the hope. I think that that's the expectation, and there are guys that are playing for jobs. Maybe not with the New England Patriots per se, but with the other 31 teams too, hoping for an opportunity beyond this weekend. And frankly, Rich, I think when you look at their roster, there's going to be significant turnover. Everybody knows that going into the offseason by the time they come out in the spring of 2025. So there's a lot of guys who played a lot of football this year for this team that need to put a good game on tape in that final week of the season. So yeah, there's that part of it. There's the business incentive as a player. But the Patriots are beat up too. They're going to be down Marcus Jones, Christian Gonzalez in the secondary. There's speculation as we talk here in the middle of the week about Drake May and whether he will play. Gerard Mayo has said everything is on the table. And, as you mentioned, the Patriots have that number 1 pick, and there's probably, and I say probably in quotation marks, but I would say that many Patriot fans would like to see the team secure that number 1 pick, and that winning is secondary in this game. And I've never prescribed to that tanking philosophy. And Elliott Wolf, the Patriots general manager, is on record. He said earlier this year, that's no way to play the game, and it's it lacks integrity as a professional to purposely lose a game for better draft seeding. But when you look at the Patriot situation, you've got May, who had a concussion earlier this season against the Jets. And on the first series against the Chargers, he dodged a bullet, frankly, got a helmet-to-helmet hit as he was spinning on a run to the sideline. He was pulled off the field, went to the blue tent, went into the locker room for further evaluation, and he was cleared. And then he came back out, and in the fourth quarter of a lopsided game, really took a lot of punishing hits from the Chargers. He's the most important commodity right now for this franchise in uniform. And I think it would be understandable on a number of levels if the Patriots decide going into this game against the Bills, as many people want to see, the Bills rest guys. There's only so many guys you can keep on the sideline.
That's right.
So you're going to have to play some guys, and there's some people up front for the Bills in particular who can get after the quarterback, as you know. So I think it's fair going into this game to be concerned about Drake May's health and have that be the primary reason that he doesn't play, if that's the case. I think there's a strong sentiment to see Joe Milton get a chance as another rookie quarterback that they drafted late in the draft, just to see what he can do. It would be very unlikely, I think, for Jacoby Brissett to come back here next year as the Patriots backup. But yeah, you're caught kind of in between a rock and a hard place going into this game, because you don't want to purposely lose a game. You want to, especially with the effort they had last week, I think, against the Chargers, you want to end the season for culture's sake on a much better note. But at the same time, there is that question about the quarterback's health specifically.
Well, and that number one draft pick, of course, which
absolutely, you can't escape that. You can't avoid that.
Yeah, and let's face it, it's either, when you have that top overall draft pick, there's so many things you can do with it, right? Yeah. You can actually use it, or you can get a ton of draft capital for it. So it'll be interesting to see after the game what happens. Final question for you about the Pats. What pieces are most important for them? Do they need better skill positions? I think you mentioned earlier, and I agree with you, I think it's more about the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the football in terms of importance for them and where they go in free agency and in the draft. And I would ask you further, as sort of a piggyback to the question, what kind of cap space? I think they have a lot going into this offseason. Yeah. And what kind of draft picks do they have going into the offseason as well that they can work with?
Well, they made a trade early in the year back in training camp. They traded Matthew Judon to the Falcons for a third-round pick. So I think they did well, considering Judon's status coming off an injury and also his age and contract situation. And so they've got that pick, top 3 rounds. As you mentioned, right now they're in position for the number 1 pick. And I do believe, especially after seeing some teams in recent weeks, that it begins up front. I mean, I've always believed that. But when I think about the Chargers, for example, 3 top 17 picks on their offensive line, including Joe Wald, who was the number 1 pick this past year. And the Patriots desperately need to upgrade the offensive line, and they got to start at the tackle position. They definitely need to upgrade their wide receiver room. It's a wide receiver room that has 2 rookies who've been, frankly, busts, to put it mildly, this season. And I hate to use that word in season number 1. But again, going back to the Chargers example, they just played Ladd McConkey, who had more yards receiving in that game, including 2 touchdowns, as the 2 picks the Patriots used with a trade they made with the Chargers. Out of 34, Chargers pick McConkey. The Patriots take those 2 draft picks and select Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, who doesn't have a catch all season as a rookie 4th-round wide receiver, while Polk has been really mired in the doghouse early in the season and just never been able to escape as the year's gone along, with about a dozen catches in his rookie campaign. So they got to upgrade there, but I think it starts on the offensive line, and that's why, for me, if they wind up with the number 1 pick at this point, we're not really diving into draft prep. Travis Hunter's awfully appealing. There's a lot of excitement in a player like that. Some people believe he's better suited to play defensive back than wide receiver. Some people believe he's better as a wide receiver than as a defensive back in the NFL. But for me, I think, as you alluded to, you can get a lot of capital for that pick at number 1. And they need, I think, to start on the offensive line. And at the same time, in the trenches, an edge rusher or someone who can affect games from that defensive front, particularly on the edge. It's something they've lacked for a long time. They've been able to scheme around it with their defenses under Bill Belichick and company. But I think this year, the lack of any pressure on quarterbacks, and especially in the second half of the season, has really hurt them defensively.
Last question. I know you got to go because I know you're busy. You just mentioned Belichick, and he's been mentioned a couple of times in this interview. Obviously, going to North Carolina, which I think shocked pretty much everybody. and the football world. What does Patriots Nation and the folks up there, what do they think about this?
Well, there's never any shortage of intrigue and talk show fodder here in New England with the Patriots. And, who thought a lot of it would stem from a decision by the former head coach of the Patriots and the University of North Carolina for Bill to wind up in Chapel Hill. I mean, I think there's a lot of interest to see how he'll do. I think there's equal surprise here, as I'm sure there is in Buffalo, that Bill has gone that route. I think there's still a strong belief on the part of many, and I certainly wouldn't rule it out, that Bill may wind up, especially given the contract situation there, back in the NFL. I think, the Don Shula record is still dangling out there, and, he's someone who wants to coach football. And, I think reading the tea leaves, seeing the landscape from where he was going to North Carolina was the best option at this time to do that. But there may be a better option that presents itself before too long. And considering the contract situation, which I think come the spring or June of 25, it will in essence allow him to get out of that situation for a very small buyout, relatively speaking, considering the kind of money he's made in his coaching career. So I don't think anything at this point could be ruled out. And certainly never expected him to be there as the head coach of the Tar Heels as we're talking today.
And, well, look, I mean, college football and college sports, at least football and basketball, are much different today than they were even 5 years ago with the NIL. It's becoming more of a, air quotes, professional game, and so there are people that have been in the NFL that are moving towards college because they have that expertise of being able to build and recruit, air quotes, because they know they have money available to them. So I can understand why he would maybe make this move, but I can also understand how it would be a way for him to get back in the game kind of slowly and uptick, and maybe even, like Deion Sanders has done, work with kids and treat them and groom them as pros instead of college athletes. I think that's really interesting. I do think, though, the thing that amazed me most was, and I don't know how much, if any, you've watched Inside the NFL, but he was killing it on that show. I mean, he was not only really analytical and really smart and a lot of things he talked about, but he also seemed to be having fun doing it. And for that reason, it really surprised me that he sort of bailed on that to get back into coaching.
Yeah, I think, to people who've watched Bill over the years and heard from people that know him best, it's really not a shock that he did so well on television. He had a stint with the NFL Network with Rich Eisen a couple of years ago for the NFL 100 series, and he was terrific on that. And, there are times occasionally in press conferences, that didn't necessarily go viral when Bill would be talking to the media on a Friday, let's say game plan put to bed, more reflective on history of football topics or general league-wide topics. And he would be so expansive, and people that know him, and are in his social circles will talk about his great sense of humor. And he's certainly an extremely intelligent individual. And so that, I guess, for me, it wasn't surprising that he did so well on television in whatever role he was on. I was surprised at how much he was on television or online, just the number of platforms. To see him with Pat McAfee, and then, of course, as you mentioned, Inside the NFL, and then the YouTube stuff that he was doing with Matt Patricia, and whatever else, the Jim Gray, Tom Brady podcasts that he was doing. He seemed to be omnipresent, which that surprised me a bit. I got to say one quick thing about North Carolina that I'm most curious and interested in watching. The kids that are going to go there because they want to play for Bill Belichick and get NFL ready, and they're going to get great NIL offers if that's the case. How are they going to handle being coached hard by Bill Belichick if he coaches them in even close to the same way he coaches professional players? Because that's the other part of luring players with the NIL. It's easy for guys to jump, and you see that constantly, middle of the season.
That's right.
And here in Bill O'Brien had the quarterback at Boston College, started the first part of the season. Bill O'Brien benched him, and the kid transferred right away, went into the portal right away without wasting breath. So that's the thing that I'm most curious to see is, how that shakes out on the other side of what could be a good first year for him.
Yeah, it's very interesting stuff. Look, I know you're taking time out of a very busy day. When it comes to the NFL, holidays are kind of what they are for a lot of folks in the NFL. They're just other days, unfortunately. But I want you to have a great new year. I want to thank you very specially for doing this with and for us, and certainly good luck on Sunday. And Yeah, happy off season coming up, and we certainly hope that the Pats look. We like healthy rivalries, right? That aren't super one sided. So I hope that the Pats in the next year are able to fill the roster a little bit better and develop into certainly a more competitive team, I guess, if you will, with the Bills. So again, thanks so much, man. Happy New Year's. I really appreciate you doing this.
Hey, Rich, good to connect again. Thanks, and Happy New Year's to you and yours.
Be well.
You too. Bye-bye.